Tonight on social media, right-wing conspiracy theories going viral about David Hogg, a 17-year-old Parkland shooting survivor. The unsubstantiated claims say he's a crisis actor, a trained actor who takes advantage of tragedies for political gain.
What you are hearing is an NBC News story from last week about the response to survivors from the most recent mass school shooting in Florida. Fringe websites posted articles and videos accusing Hogg of memorizing lines when speaking with the media.
It's disgusting that these trolls are out there trying to make this about me and not the people that were murdered.
Fake news, often fueled by conspiracy theories, has exploded in recent years. The ubiquity of Twitter and Facebook and the ease with which legitimate-seeming websites and blogs and news outlets can be fabricated has made it ever easier to distribute all sorts of misinformation. But researchers from Cambridge in the United Kingdom think they might have a strategy for building resistance to fake news. Their answer isn't to counter it, it's more to join it. They've developed an online game that lets you practice generating and distributing fake news as a novel strategy for immunizing yourself against bad information. Professor Sander van der Linden is director of the Social Decision-Making Lab at Cambridge University. Professor van der Linden, welcome to Quirks and Quarks.
Great being on the show.
First of all, tell me about your game. What do you do when you play it?
Yeah, so we developed this game with a Dutch media collective. They're called Bad News. And the way that the game works is that essentially it lets you step into the shoes of a fake news producer. And so your task in the game is to create misleading content. And you have a followers meter as well as a credibility meter. And the idea is to attract as many followers as possible while also maintaining your credibility levels.
Well, what kinds of activities or tools do you use during the game to spread the fake news?
Yeah, so you start the game essentially by posting something on Twitter, and then it really evolves from there. And so players can choose different paths. They can choose to create a news article, post a meme to try to create followers and maintaining credibility. And so throughout the game, you can earn 6 badges, and these badges were designed based on theory in terms of what the most common tactics and techniques are in the production of fake news. So, for example, the first badge is impersonation, and so you impersonate someone famous or someone who's in a political position and use their credibility and their reach to try to influence people.
Well, we're already surrounded by a lot of fake news and misinformation. Why do you want people to do more of this?
Well, essentially what it is that we're trying to demystify what some of these tactics are. So they're out there, they're being used by, Russian troll farms and other people involved in the production of fake news. And what we want to do is we want to elucidate for people what these tactics are, how they work, and how to spot them. So I tend to use a magic analogy here that works quite well. Is that the first time you go see a magic show, you might be duped into thinking that it's real, that it's magic. But once the magician explains the trick, you won't be fooled by it again the next time around. And that's really the purpose here. That once people know it, they've seen it, they've rehearsed it, they're familiar with it, they're less likely to be duped by it.
How do you know that it works?
Well, we did a small pilot study with the paper-based version of the game. The paper-based version was slightly different because it doesn't have an online social media element, for example. But we went into schools and we had some teenagers play the game, essentially, in the treatment group. And so we randomly assigned 2 groups of students to play the game. And in the control group, the students just followed their regular lesson plan. And what we found is that after they played the game, we then administered a bunch of fabricated fake news articles on a topic of immigration. But what we found is that students judged the reliability of the article to be much lower than in the control group. So students who played the game were more skeptical and more suspicious of the article that they were reading afterwards. And from some of the open-ended responses, we could see that they were applying some of the techniques that they learned in the game. For example, that the source was invalid or made up, or that hyperbole was being used, and so on. And we're hoping to gather much more data with the online version to continue to evaluate the efficacy of the game.
Now, why is this approach of, as you say, walking in the other side's shoes better than just providing good information, good scientific facts, and arguing with that?
Well, the real premise of inoculation theory is to try to get there first, to play offense rather than defense, if you will. So about a year ago, we did a study where we tried to inoculate people specifically on the issue of climate change. And we basically exposed people to a bit of the misinformation, a weak form of the misinformation, just as with the regular vaccine, you're exposed to a little bit, a weakened dose of the virus that's then supposed to trigger antibodies in your immune system to help confer resistance against future infection. And it works the same way with information, that it triggers mental antibodies, so resistance, because you've seen the information before, you've received facts that you can use to try to debunk that information. So then when you're actually exposed to the full dose of fake news, you're more resistant. But it's very difficult to do that, to tailor that to every specific news story or every fake story that's out there. So the purpose of the online game was to try to take this to a much more general level, to try to confer some general immunity. And the best way to do that, at least the way that we hypothesized, is to let people step into the shoes of a fake news producer, see what the tactics are, know them, to hopefully then be more resistant to them and help spot them when you're actually out there being confronted with fake news.
Well, how successful has your game been at actually immunizing people against fake news?
Well, we're currently evaluating the game. So the game went live a few days ago, and we're gathering data. So there's an option to participate voluntarily in scientific research when you're playing the game, and that allows us to test how reliable people find fake stories, people's ability to discern real from fake news, both at the beginning of the game as well as at the end of the game. And then hopefully, what we hope to see is that people become much better at spotting fake news and sort of fine-tuning their judgments of what's reliable and what's unreliable after having earned these badges. And so we haven't been able to look at the data yet, but after a few weeks, when we've sort of gathered a big data set, we hope to then evaluate the game and use that to further improve and adapt the game.
Of course, the people who are on the other side, who believe in what you call misinformation, might point to your bias to say that you're doing the brainwashing here. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, and so one of the badges in the game is what we call deflection, which is basically your fake news if you don't agree with someone, right? And so we part of the game is to help teach people spot these deflection tactics. One thing we are very careful with, though, in the game is that it's ideologically balanced. So at every juncture, there's a possibility to go left or right politically. And in fact, we point out to people that it doesn't really matter if you choose to attack the left or the right. What matters is that you polarize people, because that's the strategy that's being used against you, regardless of what side you're on. And that's really one of the key purposes of fake news, is to drive people apart. And so we hope to sort of help people recognize that regardless of their political preferences. And so in the game, you'll find left-wing examples, right-wing examples, and it's really not infused with an ideological preference for anything.
Dr. van der Linden, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
Professor Sander van der Linden is director of the Social Decision-Making Lab at Cambridge University. If you'd like to test your ability to spot a fake headline from a real one, take our quiz. You can find it and a link to their game on our website at cbc.ca/quirks.